time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The decision was delivered without ceremony, without a family meeting, and without another chance to negotiate. King Charles had authorized the removal of Meghan from the final Commonwealth position, still connecting her name to the Crown's international royal network. Thousands of miles away, Harry received the news and realized what it represented. This was no routine administrative change. It was the severing of one of the last symbolic threads connecting his wife to royal life. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew what he was ending: the Commonwealth Youth Patron-at-Large role, a ceremonial position linking its holder to youth initiatives connected with the monarchy, had become more than a title. For Meghan, it preserved a bridge to the international work she and Harry once imagined as their royal future. For the king, that bridge had become dangerously unclear. A position tied to the crown could not remain suspended between official service and independent life. Charles read the directive alone and stopped at the final paragraph. He read it twice, then placed his pen beside the file. The Palace Directive, an authorized written order carrying the monarch's approval, would remove Meghan from her final Commonwealth-linked position and end the last route through which her name retained ceremonial authority. He hesitated because he knew the signature would wound his son. Then the king signed. Harry received the confirmation privately and went silent. Meghan watched him absorb the words, but he did not immediately call London or demand an explanation. Instead, he walked away for several minutes, struggling with the feeling that another piece of their life had vanished without him being able to stop it. When he returned, she saw more than anger. He felt powerless, and she understood why. The order had not been created that morning. Charles had seen internal disagreements over how Meghan's Commonwealth connection was being described abroad, and one sentence inside the recommendation changed everything. Continued symbolic ambiguity was no longer sustainable. In plain terms, the palace believed the title was creating uncertainty over whether she still carried authority associated with the crown. The king now saw the issue as royal control, not family sensitivity. Harry would discover something worse. His father had not begun the process because of a headline, broadcast, or scandal. Weeks earlier, behind closed doors, one dispute had pushed Charles toward the point of no return. And to understand why one signature devastated Harry so deeply, the story must return to the three people whose histories made that signature almost impossible to separate from betrayal. For Charles, the decision concerned the integrity of the crown. For Meghan, it touched identity, dignity, and the final institutional connection to a chapter of her life she had once embraced publicly. But for Harry, the meaning was brutally personal. Every disagreement between Palace and Sussex had eventually forced him toward the same impossible position: husband on one side, son on the other, with loyalty to either appearing like rejection of the other. Meghan understood why the loss cut deeper than a simple title change. Her Commonwealth work had once represented a future in which she and Harry could serve internationally, while still carrying the authority of royal life. The Commonwealth itself, a voluntary association of nations, many with historic ties to Britain, had given that work global meaning. To her, the role was one of the last surviving links to the version of royal service they once believed they could build together. Harry felt that history pressing down on him when she sat across from him and asked one question. Had his father warned him personally? He hesitated. That pause answered her before any words could. She looked away, and he felt the humiliation immediately. The prince was not simply grieving the removal of her position. He was confronting the fact that a decision touching his wife so directly had reached him through formal channels instead of through his father. Charles had wrestled with that exact choice before the order was finalized. The king had considered calling his younger son himself, but senior advisors warned that an emotional conversation could turn a settled institutional decision into another family negotiation. For the monarch, that risk mattered, because royal-linked appointments carried a chain of accountability, a clear line showing who had authority to act, speak, or represent the institution. He believed that line had become dangerously blurred. Meghan, however, had already sensed something changing. Days earlier, she noticed that references to her Commonwealth position had quietly disappeared from briefing material prepared for an upcoming charitable initiative. She mentioned it to Harry, and he tried to dismiss the omission as administrative caution. But she did not believe that. The Duchess had seen enough palace language to recognize when something was being removed deliberately. Then the truth began moving closer. Harry learned that his father had almost called him, that the decision had been debated before it was signed, and that Meghan's fears had not been imagined. Yet neither of them knew what had actually triggered the review. The answer was buried inside one private Commonwealth planning meeting, where a single request transformed irritation into a question of authority. That meeting would become the moment everyone later remembered, when a disagreement over wording became a battle over who still had the right to speak in the monarchy's name. The final break did not begin with a television interview or a public accusation. It began inside a closed planning session where one phrase triggered a chain reaction nobody in the room could reverse. Meghan's representatives wanted her Commonwealth affiliation included prominently in material surrounding an international youth initiative. Palace officials objected. Messages moved upward. Within days, the disagreement reached Charles himself, and what looked like a dispute over wording became a question of royal permission, ownership, and control. Meghan had every reason to care about the exact language. Charitable initiatives connected to royal figures often depend heavily on titles and affiliations, because those words can suggest institutional backing even when no direct royal authority is being exercised. Her Commonwealth Youth Patron-at-Large designation, a ceremonial role linking her to youth work across Commonwealth networks, had survived as one of the final symbols of the international service she and Harry once imagined together. Then one meeting changed the temperature completely. At a private planning session in a London Commonwealth Foundation office, Meghan's representative asked that promotional material introduce her as Commonwealth Youth Patron-at-Large, representing the continuing Sussex commitment to the Commonwealth. A palace liaison objected immediately. The problem was one word: representing. To palace officials, that word suggested authority. To Meghan, removing it stripped the role of meaning. Meghan refused to treat the objection as harmless editing when the message reached her. She told Harry privately that if she could not be described as representing the work attached to the position, then the title itself had become ceremonial decoration. He agreed. The prince saw the demand as another narrowing of their former place within royal life. Another reminder that every surviving connection seemed to come with tighter restrictions. Charles received the disputed wording soon afterward. He read the briefing, circled the word representing, and closed the folder. According to a documented account of the internal discussion, the king told his private secretary that nobody outside the working royal structure could be allowed to create uncertainty over who spoke for the crown. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages a monarch's official business and sensitive communications, making that conversation far more consequential than a routine editorial dispute. Then Charles asked the question that changed everything. Why did the role still exist at all? He did not request another draft. He did not suggest softer language. He ordered a review of the position itself. Harry learned about that meeting only after the process had already advanced, and by then, the argument was no longer about a single word. The paperwork may have begun the crisis, but the confrontation between father and son would expose the wound underneath it, and neither man would leave that conversation unchanged. Harry did not ask for a committee explanation. He wanted his father. When the two men finally spoke privately, Years of unresolved anger were compressed into one brutal question. Why had Meghan been stripped of something she believed she had earned through service? Charles refused to retreat. Harry refused to soften. There were no aides between them, no carefully prepared public statements, and no ceremonial distance capable of disguising what the argument had become: a son accusing his father of erasing his wife. Harry had pushed for the meeting because he refused to let palace staff explain a decision that had come from the sovereign himself. The sovereign, simply the reigning monarch with final authority over formal royal appointments, had already approved the removal, and Charles entered knowing there was almost nothing left to negotiate. His younger son entered believing the opposite. The prince still hoped that if he could make his father understand the personal damage, the order might somehow be stopped. Harry placed a copy of the removal notice between them and looked directly at Charles. Was there really no other way? He asked. The king kept his hands still and answered that a title could not survive if nobody agreed on what authority it carried. That response struck harder than Harry expected. He had wanted regret, perhaps even hesitation. Instead, he heard a boundary. Harry argued that Meghan was being punished because the palace had never accepted their independence. He insisted that leaving frontline royal duties should not have meant surrendering every connection they had built through years of service. Charles pushed back immediately. Independence, he said, could not exist beside language suggesting official royal representation. The prince shoved his chair backward in frustration, and the sound broke what little calm remained between them. Charles then disclosed the detail Harry had not expected. According to a recorded account of the private conversation, the king confirmed that the disputed Commonwealth wording had been shown to him personally before the review began. Harry froze. Until that moment, part of him had blamed advisors, courtiers, and palace machinery. Now he understood that his father had seen the trigger himself and had chosen to act. Harry asked one final question. Could the removal at least be suspended? Charles did not soften it. The order would stand. The prince finally understood that he had not come to change the decision. He had come to hear why it would never change. Harry left carrying a deeper wound than anger. He believed his father had chosen institution over family. But Charles was already working from a larger rule about royal titles, authority, and the future of the crown. And that rule was about to reveal that Meghan's removal was not an isolated punishment at all. Behind the emotion was a principle Charles had become unwilling to compromise. Royal connection, in his view, could no longer exist in permanent ambiguity. Either an appointment carried active responsibility to the crown, or it became private history. That distinction sounded administrative until Meghan's name reached the table. Then it became explosive, because enforcing the rule against his daughter-in-law meant Charles would also have to accept what it might cost him with Harry. Charles framed the matter as part of a wider doctrine, not a single act against one person. A royal appointment, an official or honorary position carrying some recognized connection to the monarchy, had to make clear whether its holder still served the crown or merely carried a historic association with it. That distinction mattered because the public could easily mistake a familiar title for present authority. Senior aides warned that leaving Meghan's role untouched could turn dormant positions into unofficial badges of royal influence. William understood the logic, but he also understood his brother. When he met Charles privately, the prince chose his words with care. He supported clearer boundaries around royal titles, yet warned his father that Harry would never experience the removal as a neutral administrative act. He would see Meghan's name, his wife's history, and another deliberate closing of a door. Charles listened, but he did not retreat. Charles remained standing after William left. He stayed beside the unopened door for several seconds before speaking quietly to a trusted aide. According to a documented account of that private exchange, The king admitted that every constitutional decision involving Harry seemed to become a judgment on their relationship. Constitutional responsibility, the monarch's duty to protect the rules, limits, and authorities surrounding the crown, gave him little room to act only as a father. That was the cruelty of the moment. William had also learned something important during the discussion. Meghan was not the only person whose inactive honorary connections had been reviewed. Other dormant roles were being examined as part of the same effort to remove ambiguity. Yet hers became urgent because of the disputed word, representing. The future king understood that this single phrase had transformed a broad review into an immediate decision. Charles rejected one final compromise. Meghan could not keep the title privately while being forbidden to use it publicly, because a role stripped of all practical meaning served no purpose. The king chose clarity over sentiment, and then the reasoning left the palace and reached California. There, Doctrine stopped sounding like doctrine. Meghan would read the final words herself. Harry would watch her reaction, and the prince would be forced to confront the fear beneath all his anger, that he had failed to protect her from losing one more piece of the life they once shared. There was no shouting when the final confirmation arrived. That made the moment worse. Meghan read the language slowly, reached the final sentence, and set the message down. Harry watched her face change before she said anything. He had spent years insisting that leaving frontline royal life did not require abandoning every principle they once represented. Now the last Commonwealth connection was gone, and neither anger nor argument could restore what Charles had formerly taken away. Meghan understood how quickly the decision would become real. The removal took effect immediately, meaning future biographies, charitable introductions, and Commonwealth-related material could no longer use her former designation. That mattered, because the title had not simply described a past duty, it had linked her public work to a wider international network. Staff began changing material already prepared for upcoming appearances, and suddenly the loss was no longer hidden inside palace language. Meghan saw the change herself when a draft biography appeared without the title. She read the altered wording, closed the laptop, and told Harry she did not want their team fighting publicly to restore something the king clearly no longer wanted her to hold. He stared at her, stunned by the calm in her voice. She was hurt, but she would not beg for a place that had already been withdrawn. Harry reacted differently. He wanted to challenge the decision and make clear that the role had represented genuine work, not borrowed prestige. The prince believed silence would allow others to rewrite Meghan's service as though it had never mattered. She pushed back. She told him that turning her loss into another public war with his father would only give the palace more control over what came next. Then Harry learned something that made the wound deeper. According to a documented account shared with him through private correspondence, Charles had personally rejected a compromise that would have preserved Meghan's designation as an honorary legacy title. An honorary legacy title, a ceremonial label kept as recognition of past service without present authority, could have softened the break. The king had refused even that. To Harry, the message was unmistakable. His father wanted the separation to be final. Meghan surprised him again. She would not request reconsideration. She would not appeal. She would not ask Charles to reverse himself. Her refusal changed the balance completely. The monarch had taken the role, but he would not decide how she remembered the work behind it. Harry was left with a harder choice than anger. Defending Meghan could mean attacking his father again, reopening every old wound and starting another cycle. Or it could mean listening to her and letting this particular battle end. For once, the decisive moment would not come from the palace at all. It would come from a husband and wife sitting alone, with no advisors, no courtiers, and nowhere left to hide from what the conflict had become. Harry expected Meghan to demand a response. Instead, she asked him to do something far harder. Nothing. No furious statement, no midnight call to London, no attempt to force Charles back to the negotiating table. Sitting privately together, she told him that fighting for a title already withdrawn would only give the title greater power over their future. Harry resisted. Then he understood the deeper request. Meghan was not surrendering to the crown. She was asking him to stop living inside its decisions. Harry had already begun preparing what he wanted to say to his father. He believed silence would be read as acceptance, as though Meghan had never deserved the role in the first place. She saw the danger differently. The position mattered because it represented years of service and a future they once imagined together, but allowing its loss to control their next move would keep them emotionally tied to palace approval. That was the trap she wanted to avoid. Meghan reached across and placed Harry's phone face down when he moved toward it. No aides were present. No advisors were shaping the moment. She told him she did not want him calling Charles that night. The prince pulled his hand back in disbelief. He had spent years believing that defending her meant fighting harder whenever the institution closed another door. Harry finally admitted what sat beneath the anger. Every royal loss involving Meghan felt like proof that he had failed to protect her from the world he was born into. She listened, then answered with a truth he had resisted for years. Protecting her could not mean reopening the same family wound every time the crown made a decision they hated. The Duchess was not asking him to forgive his father. She was asking him to stop letting the conflict decide their future. Meghan then revealed something she had kept mostly to herself. In a private conversation between the couple, she told Harry she had suspected the Commonwealth role would eventually disappear from the moment they stepped away from frontline royal duties. What hurt was not simply losing it. What hurt was realizing how much emotion still surrounded a title they no longer needed to define their lives. Harry looked at the phone again, but this time he did not call. Instead, he sent Charles a short private message acknowledging that he understood the decision was final, even though he strongly disagreed with it. The king received no argument, no demand, no threat of another public fight. And that silence carried further than either man expected. Inside the family, the shouting had stopped. Outside it, the story was about to become louder than ever, as the removal turned into a global argument over punishment, belonging, and what the monarchy believed royal identity should mean. By morning, a private family rupture had become an international symbol. Commentators argued over whether Charles had restored necessary clarity or delivered an unnecessarily severe rejection. Supporters of Meghan saw humiliation. Defenders of the king saw institutional discipline. But one image captured the entire dispute better than hours of debate. Harry stepping from a vehicle without Meghan beside him, his expression tight, just as newspapers across London announced that his wife's final Commonwealth role had been erased. Harry saw the coverage almost immediately, yet he did exactly what Meghan had asked. He said nothing. The prince issued no furious statement, made no public accusation, and refused to turn the moment into another direct confrontation with his father. That restraint mattered, because royal watchers had come to expect conflict whenever the Sussexes and palace collided. This time, silence became the story. Charles received the morning press summary and stopped at the reports describing his younger son as devastated. A press summary, the daily briefing that condenses major media coverage for senior royals, was meant to help the monarch understand how events were being framed beyond palace walls. The king said nothing about the headlines themselves. Instead, he asked one quiet question. Had Harry responded privately? The answer was yes. That short message from his son now carried more weight than every front page outside. The public reaction sharpened outside Buckingham Palace. Copies of one major morning newspaper appeared beneath the palace railings, with the headline, "Final Tie Cut," printed above side-by-side photographs of Charles and Meghan. A small crowd gathered, and the argument broke almost instantly. Some called the decision necessary discipline. Others described it as needlessly cruel. The palace remained silent, refusing to answer the emotional accusations surrounding the family. Meghan watched the debate from a distance and refused to be pulled back into it. She understood that the Commonwealth, a voluntary network of nations connected by shared cooperation and historic ties, was larger than any palace title. Harry understood that too, even if the distinction still hurt. A Commonwealth broadcaster captured the shift clearly, describing the removal not as the end of her connection to Commonwealth causes, but as the end of her formal authority to connect that work to the monarchy. And suddenly, the argument changed. Charles had drawn his institutional boundary. Meghan had refused to plead. Harry had refused another public war. The world could continue arguing over punishment, dignity, and royal control, but the noise was beginning to fade. Only one question remained. What was left between the king, his son, and Meghan once the title itself had disappeared? The final verdict would not be written in headlines. It would be written in what each of them finally chose to release. In the end, nobody reversed the order. Charles did not restore the role. Meghan did not ask him to. Harry did not launch the confrontation many expected. That was what made the ending so striking. The final Commonwealth title disappeared exactly as the king intended, but so did its power to keep the Sussexes suspended between two lives. What began as another royal punishment became something more complicated, a painful separation, a father-son defeat, and, unexpectedly, a moment of release. Meghan accepted that the removal was permanent. Her formal Commonwealth designation disappeared from future official references, and the palace closed the administrative review without creating any route for restoration. An administrative review, an internal examination of whether a royal-linked role should continue under existing rules, had now reached its final conclusion. That mattered because there was no appeal waiting behind the curtain, no temporary suspension, and no hidden compromise still being discussed. Charles held firmly to the principle that royal authority had to follow active royal responsibility. The king believed someone could not remain publicly connected to crown authority while living completely outside the working royal structure. By refusing to make an exception for his own family, he protected the rule he had established. But the victory carried no sense of triumph. He knew exactly who had paid the emotional price. Harry looked once more at the final correspondence and chose not to answer. The prince remained devastated, but something inside him had shifted. For years, every royal decision involving Meghan had seemed to demand another response, another defense, another fight with his father. This time, he allowed disagreement to exist without allowing it to control his next move. The silence was painful, but it was also freedom. Meghan made her own decision. She asked her staff to describe all future Commonwealth-related charitable work without using any former royal designation. She did not deny the work she had done, and she did not pretend the loss meant nothing. Instead, she separated her service from the title that once defined it. What had begun as something taken from her became a boundary she was now willing to accept. Charles later learned through private palace correspondence that Harry would not contest the removal. The monarch did not celebrate. He sat with the knowledge that institutional clarity had been achieved at a cost no constitutional document could measure. He had preserved the crown's authority, but he had also closed another door between himself and his son. The truth was finally unavoidable. Charles had not erased Meghan's past, but he had ended her formal authority within that royal framework. Meghan kept control of what came next. Harry stopped trying to force two worlds back together that no longer wanted to coexist. The last official thread had been cut, not with reconciliation, not with triumph, but with acceptance. Charles kept the crown's boundary intact. Meghan walked forward without its title, and Harry was left to mourn what had vanished, while finally understanding that some royal doors do not need to reopen for a life to continue. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.